Often when I hear a discussion about new gen protagonists, I tend to hear names like Mob, Denji, Itadori, even names like Deku and Asta being brought up. And I've talked about before how the whole new gen thing with certain series is confusing, considering some series go on for 2 years while others go on for a decade. But look, I won't fault anyone for saying any of those characters since it's subjective opinion. But if I had to choose the best protagonist out of the quote-unquote new-gen series, or well, my favorite main character out of any series that's come out in the last few years, it would be Gabimaru the Hollow from Hell's Paradise. This is a series I've talked about on a few different occasions, but it's been a long time since I've done a dedicated video on the series. My personal favorite out of the newer series to come out, but admittedly with the direction Chainsaw Man Part 2 is going in, that might change. But this video isn't about that, so back to the topic. Gabimaru for me is a great example of watching a character fundamentally change and make a complete 180, Thorfinn being the other one that I've talked about recently. By the end of the story, a completely different person and almost unrecognizable outside of their appearance. But before I get ahead of myself and talk about point B, we have to go back to where we're introduced to the character. The first impressions of who he is, or in other words, the character's want versus their need that we can sort of gather from the first chapter. Well, actually, before we even do that, the name of the character is pretty straightforward. Gabimaru the Hollow. Bleach fans, easy now. But this is pretty straightforward. His nickname essentially means empty, void. And in this first chapter, we see that he's captured and set to be executed once again, which all other attempts have failed. The first chapter of Jigokuraku is one of the best examples of establishing a main character. His attitude is evident in his demeanor and his way of speaking, and his desire in the first chapter is simple: to die. A character described with having no tears, no emotions, no attachments, and no desire to live. Quote, "In attachment towards life, I've slaughtered heaps along the way, so why would I expect a long life for myself? I'm a ninja to the core. I'm not someone who sees the value of life. From the time we're born, ninja from the Iwagakure learn how to kill, and nothing else. Many don't survive the training. The payoff is a superhuman body, though we..." And there ends the quote. I'll get into pieces of this more as the video goes along, but at this point his want, as is presented to us, is to no longer exist, to die. And one could predict that therefore his need would be to value life. But no, since that's a curveball, as then Gabimaru is shown to have humanity inside all along. Gabimaru is being questioned by Sagiri over his abilities and why he got caught, which is when we are told that he was set up by the leader of his clan for trying to escape the village, saying because he was the best and the chief had him marry his daughter. I must say, I really do love how Gabimaru's dialogue, especially in this next quote, is so informal for someone who is a ninja, but anyways, quote, "The daughter, by the way, is dim-witted as they come. It's beyond me how a ninja's chief girl could end up like that. Peace-loving and naive to the ways of the world, like a doll in a box. And she turned my life upside down." One of the things Gabimaru's wife then says as he recollects is, quote, "We must be grateful for the gift of life." End quote. After this, we start getting a turn in the very first chapter that I believe instantly makes Gabimaru all the more interesting from the jump. Quote, "Why would a hollow man kill 20 men while resisting arrest?" Context being him fighting back against his executions, which would explain why they keep failing, but why would that be the case if he wants to die? Luckily for him, the lady who's been questioning him the whole time is known as Decapitator Asa, or well, Sagiri will grant his wish, and ironically as she goes to execute him, Gabimaru instinctively dodges and begins to fight back. Sagiri then says a quote that has stayed with me since the first time I read this series over 2 years ago. Quote, "Some bluff and keep a brave face to the bitter end. Some turn desperate and cling to life, while others deceive themselves into accepting death. Gabimaru the Hollow, no doubt there's a great emptiness within you. It's no wonder given the life you've led. And yet, you've been lying. You do have an attachment to life. Yes, you love your wife." End quote. Sagiri here is pretty much calling his bluff in the most sympathetic way possible, again being understanding of the life that he had to live from a very young age. A sort of ruthless upbringing where all you're trained to do is murder. I imagine things such as sentiments and any sort of compassion needs to be thrown out of the window. And considering that not many survive the training, I think without getting into much of the detail, it could easily be seen from the jump that, well, it's not an environment that's optimal for developing a healthy sort of understanding of your emotions and how to deal with them. And so seeing this actually being the real conflict with the character is something I find to be really stand out amongst all of the things that I've read. We then see a really heartwarming stretch of Gabimaru's wife expressing her sentiments towards him, saying that he even is full of kindness himself, and Gabimaru's in denial of those sentiments, showing that his true intention reason for wanting to run away was to give his wife a more peaceful life. And honestly, this stretch was super wholesome, and it really made Gabimaru's wife an extremely likable person just from a few panels from which he's introduced. So now the only way to get the peaceful life he desires for her is to be pardoned of his crimes by getting the elixir of life from a dangerous island. And the chapter ends with Gabimaru saying, quote, "I'll survive this and return home for your sake." The true situation with Gabimaru isn't really about life and death, although that's part of it. If you are looking for a series that does tackle the whole thing with life, then Alice in Borderlands would be a great recommendation, but it's more so about the way to live. His belief is that his strength, which comes from the upbringing he had, is to be emotionless, that his ability to kill and be effective is by being empty, having no attachments. And I think a part of this can really feel relatable, as all of us have faced different challenges in our life, some more than others, but we all have experience where our main way of coping with them sometimes is to grow apathetic, detached, to avoid situations that force us to commit out of fear. In a way, we're tricked to believe by others and even ourselves that the best way to go about living is to tough it out. If there was ever a meme of me as a person, it would be the one where it's like, me going through the most traumatic experience of my life saying it is what it is. But feelings of love, kindness, sympathy are then deeply locked away or tried to be denied as much as possible so that we never risk feeling hate, loneliness, sadness, and bitterness. So over time, all that's left is nothing. Or so we think. This is a conflict within Gabimaru, a man doing his hardest to push on through life without his sentiment, which he has done up to this point, without the thing that makes him human. Clinging on to the title of Hollow is something he does very desperately in this first chapter, believing that is where his strength comes from, the strength to protect those he cares about, his wife, and the companions he would make on the island. There is a conflict later on in the story that really puts Gabimaru's motive of wanting to get back to his wife into question for a moment, but really it wouldn't have mattered, seeing that the actual dilemma is beyond what external realities faces him, but if not an internal conflict of which I just talked about. That, however, gets resolved, and any confusion is given an answer at the end. I won't get into it much since I know most of you are waiting to watch the anime, but all I can say then is if the anime doesn't do this story justice, the manga gives us an amazing main character who throughout the story stands out even amongst some of the most unique protagonists. Although they fall in the same sort of realm within certain things overlapping, this isn't about revenge or peace versus violence, but instead what true strength is, and the realization of his true fulfillment and happiness lies in accepting his emotions. No longer being someone who pushes through with an empty hatred, but instead it's sort of through this self-realization and acceptance where he gains an even bigger strength to protect the people he cares about. A sleepless, empty killer, changed completely by the end of the story. And as Sagiri says in the final chapter, quote, "I suppose he's no longer Gabimaru, so to speak." In a very strong cast that allows a lot of other characters to shine, Hell's Paradise still managed to give me one of my favorite newer main characters, as well as just one of my favorite main characters ever, Gabimaru.